In the heart of a tranquil suburban neighborhood, where white picket fences lined the streets and children played under the warm sun, a sinister secret lay hidden. Unbeknownst to the residents of Norwood Park Township, their neighbor, John Wayne Gacy, was harboring a twisted double life. By day, he would occasionally perform as Pogo the Clown for neighborhood children, but by night, he would hunt young boys and men, committing some of the most heinous crimes the country had ever seen. He has since gone down in history as one of America's most notorious serial killers, but the nature of his crimes continues to disturb and captivate the public, leaving many wondering how an unassuming man could be capable of such unfathomable horrors. Long before the horrors that would stain his name forever, John Wayne Gacy was a child born into ordinary circumstances on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. Raised in a middle-class family, Gacy's early years were marked by both moments of joy and unsettling darkness that would foreshadow what was to come. Gacy's relationship with his father, John Stanley Gacy Sr., was complicated. He was an alcoholic and a strict and demanding man, known to be physically abusive towards his son.
My suspicion is that when his father died, that was difficult because what it means is that you can never repair this relationship.
The young Gacy yearned for his father's approval, but this desire often seemed unattainable, setting the stage for feelings of inadequacy and seeking validation that would play a role in his later life. From an early age, Gacy was experiencing a myriad of abuse. He was first exposed to sexual abuse when the teenage daughter of a family friend reportedly undressed and played with him. Between the ages of 10 and 12, Gacy was also molested by a family friend and contractor. Afraid of getting beaten by his father, he kept the sexual abuse a secret. Gacy had a congenital heart condition that limited his physical abilities and led to lifelong obesity. Much of his youth was spent in hospitals. He experienced frequent seizures and blackouts as a teen, and at age 11, doctors discovered a brain clot, which they treated. But not even his health issues shielded him from the harshness of his father's temper. It was around this time that Gacy also began to realize that he was attracted to men, but spent his entire life pretending to be straight. After enduring abuse from his father, Gacy eventually moved to Las Vegas, where he worked as a mortuary assistant. There, he slept on a cot behind the embalming room. He later confessed to one peculiar night where he climbed into the coffin of a teenage male, caressing the body. This incident prompted him to return home after only a few months in Vegas and enroll in business school. After graduating, Gacy got married and took over the management of his father-in-law's Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. He and his wife had 2 children together. From the outside looking in, Gacy's life seemed perfectly normal. But inside, Gacy was experiencing severe inner turmoil about his sexuality and his growing urges. He eventually became involved in politics and was active in political organizations as well as the JC's civic group.
Beginning to become invulnerable, that he could rise again, and simply getting married was just another strategic plan as far as Gacy was concerned. There was no real sexual intent in this marriage, it was convenience.
A well-liked member of his community, this was one of the happiest periods of Gacy's life. He earned praise from his father, something he had been yearning for his entire life. Gacy was also affiliated with the Chicago-based clown club known as the Jolly Joker. He often graced children's parties, charitable gatherings, and various events in his clown attire and makeup, adopting the personas of Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown. In a later exchange with detectives, while he was under surveillance, he would say, "Clowns can get away with murder." In 1968, Gacy was accused of sexually assaulting a teenage boy and attempting to assault another. Strongly contesting these allegations, Gacy vehemently refuted the claims, and some of the community sided with him, placing more faith in his account than the victims. He managed to convince one of his employees to carry out an attack on the victim, in a failed attempt to prevent him from testifying. Gacy would be found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After his conviction, his marriage ended in divorce, with his wife being granted full custody of their children. During his time in prison, Gacy successfully advocated for higher wages for prison mess hall workers, and substantially boosted the membership count of the prison JCs by 600. A mode prisoner, Gacy was released on parole in the summer of 1970, after serving only 18 months of his sentence. It wouldn't take long for Gacy to reoffend in the following year, He was arrested once again after another teen claimed he was lured into Gacy's car and driven to his house where Gacy tried to force him into sex.
Cut out with a cookie cutter, they are so exactly the same. So we have to assume that there is some genetic foundation. It has to be a mutation. John Gacy was definitely born to kill.
The charges were dropped when the boy failed to appear during the trial. In 1971, Gacy started a successful construction business, becoming financially successful. He remarried a woman named Carol Hoff and settled into a new home in Norwood Park, a yellow brick ranch house that would eventually become a horrifying graveyard. Gacy's ability to deceive his neighbors and community took on a disturbing quality as he embraced his Pogo the Clown persona.
Well, I'm first cook in the kitchen, and I run the morning meal and the afternoon meal in the kitchen.
John, how long have you been here?
I've been here now a year and about 2 weeks.
He attended local parties, democratic functions, and charity events as the clown. The stark contrast between his dark and perverse impulses and his harmless clown appearance allowed him to charm and interact with the community, even making appearances at his favorite local bar dressed as Pogo the Clown. As Gacy's construction business continued to grow, he would use it to his advantage. Most of his employees were young high school students and young men, who he would often proposition for sex, sometimes under the threat of violence. But in 1972, the threat of violence would become real and Gacy's spree of brutal murders would begin. In January of 1971, Gacy would commit his first known murder after luring 16-year-old Timothy McCoy to his house for sex. The next morning, Gacy found the teen standing in the doorway with a knife in his hand. Gacy rushed to attack him, wresting the knife away and stabbing him to death. It wasn't until the teen was dead that Gacy realized he was holding the knife because he had just made breakfast, not because he had any ill intent. Even so, this moment seemed to unlock a deep desire for Gacy, who received sexual gratification from the kill. He would later say, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." Gacy continued to kill. All of his victims were young men and boys, some of whom were drifters. Others were local boys who worked for him.
The blasphemers, the idolaters, the abusers of themselves with mankind shall not inherit the kingdom of God. He had that underlined. He had the Illinois statute book with the paper clips and underlining on the Sexually Dangerous Persons Act. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he even knew what the consequences of it was. So he never showed any remorse, never any contrition, no emotion. It's what psychiatrists call a flat affect. Very narcissistic. Well, he was all that mattered.
Most of the time, he approached his victims in the same way. He lured them into his car or to his house with the prospect of a job or money. Once the victim was inside the home, Gacy would coax them with drugs or alcohol, or a twisted magic trick where he would handcuff them. He would then torture, rape, and murder them. One of his favorite acts of torture was to sit on his victim with all of his weight. He would even strangle and revive his victims, sometimes partially drowning them in his bathtub. Most of his victims were buried on his property, with several placed in a common grave underneath his crawl space. By 1978, the crawl space had no more room for bodies and Gacy began to dispose of his victims in the Des Plaines River. Gacy's 33rd known victim would be his last. On December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Priest told his mother he was meeting up with Gacy that day to discuss a potential job. But when the teen never came home, his mother immediately filed a missing person report with the police. That report would eventually lead to a search of Gacy's home, where authorities discovered a trove of suspicious items and evidence that would link him to multiple disappearances. Eventually, the police would discover several trenches filled with human remains in the crawl space beneath his house.
Us with some information pertaining to his telephone number, and through the phone number we were able to determine his full name.
Gacy would confess to killing about 30 people. Gacy's trial on 33 murder charges began on February 6, 1980. Since he had already confessed to his crimes, the trial focused more on whether or not Gacy should be declared insane and sent to a mental facility. Gacy pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but the prosecution pointed out that Gacy had to be sane in order to methodically plan out and cover up his heinous murders. After a short jury deliberation, Gacy was found guilty on March 12, 1980. He would go on to become one of the most notorious serial killers in history.
No way we can change that. We can't teach someone to develop a conscience if it's not there.
Gacy would spend 14 years in prison at the Menard Correctional Center in Chester before he was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. It was reported that his last meal included Kentucky Fried Chicken, a comfort food associated with a long-forgotten past. Years have passed since John Wayne Gacy's disturbing reign of terror, and the case continues to captivate the public's attention.
The boy told her that he wanted her to wait inside so he could go outside to talk to someone about summer work.
His clown persona went up against the twisted horrors he committed as something out of a nightmare. And while many families felt justice was served, many of Gacy's victims remain unidentified, and it's speculated that there are more victims that may never be discovered. The staggering number of victims and the depths of his depravity forces us all to confront the unsettling truth that evil can manifest in even the most unexpected of places. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and turn on notifications so you never miss a single video. Have a good day and be safe out there.